My name is Jon Altman, and I'm chairing this session and also making a short presentation. What this panel's about is livelihoods. It's on the board, you'll see it, livelihoods in states of physical, cultural and spiritual well-being, strategies for food sovereignty and security, community health and the maintenance and transmission of Indigenous languages and knowledge systems. So it's a pretty broad-ranging panel, and as in the previous panel, we're just going to have a series of very short, sharp vignettes, the emphasis on short, just really across all those issues, and then we'll have our breakout again, and we'll just reflect on some of those presentations. I just would like to say this is my third visit to Montreal and my fourth to the CICADA project. It's terrific being here, and I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Montreal. I realise that we're on their land and discussing issues that are obviously of enormous importance to them. And I'll start with my own presentation, just to perhaps indicate how one does these things in 10 minutes to my other panel members. There'll be 7 presentations in all, and one of them will be by Skype, and one of them will involve a film presentation and a short discussion of the film. I was saying to Colin, I understand why that column is there now, because it's actually got a mirror on it, and you can watch your presentation in reverse while you're making it. So, having said that, I'll have to turn to look at what my title is. The main thing is to have enough food, is something that a Ganingu elder who I've worked with for 40 years said to me in relation to his aspiration for the good life. And what I want to do in this presentation is just say a little bit about land and resource rights in Australia for Indigenous people, particularly in remote areas, and how in amongst plentiful wildlife and land ownership and resource rights, people continue to live in poverty. And my focus is particularly on people who are looking to live on land that they own. And so just starting off very quickly with a map, we had a little bit of discussion this morning around native title in Australia. This is a map I often use just to give some spatial sort of jurisdiction to the way the Australian continent is now divided. There's land rights lands, there's native title exclusive possession, and there's native title non-exclusive possession. And those 3 jurisdictions currently account for 46% of the Australian continent. And when the claims process is completed, as much as 70% of Australia's spatial jurisdiction and territoriality might be made up of Indigenous lands as recognised under Australian law. The problem is that the rights that people have on those lands are highly variable, but one of the common rights that people have under native title law is to collect resources from their land for their domestic use. So they have rights to hunt, to fish, to gather resources on their land. And what I've put on that map is also the 1,200 discrete Indigenous communities that are currently scattered around the continent, mostly on Aboriginal titled land of again, various forms of title. So in a battery change. Just have a look at the diagram that's there. Okay? So this diagram really just tries to give a sense of, using census data, of just how impoverished Indigenous people are. And I think the very telling statistic there is that people who live most remotely are actually most impoverished. And if you look at that diagram, you'll see, if you can read the key, that over 50% of people living in Indigenous households remotely are living below the poverty line. So people have plenitude in terms of land and rights to resources, but they live in deep income poverty. And what's particularly extraordinary is that over time in remote Australia, those poverty levels have increased. And yet other government statistics tell us that people engaged in a high level of hunting activity. Now, this is from the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Survey, and what we see is, particularly where people live remotely, they actually engaged in a high degree of hunting, although, like the Indigenous survey in Canada, you don't actually get much detail from this work about what the value of hunting is. But the indications are that it's still activity that's very significant for people, and it's statistically more significant when people live remotely, which isn't surprising because they're on their land with resource rights. And this is, again, just showing some comparative data. One of the challenges we face that you can see down here is the actual nature of the question changes over time. So over time, it's very hard to demonstrate comparatively how things have changed. But still a significant number of people are still at least identifying that they engaged in hunting. What does this mean on the ground? So let me now go from that macro scale down to the micro scale to Western Arnhem Land, where I've done most of my work in the last 40 years, much in collaboration with Dean Yibarbuk, who will speak after me. This is a picture of the man who made that statement at the beginning about the main thing is to have enough food. And this is a picture from 1979 when I worked with him, when bush food was plentiful because people were helped to live on their land and to live off the land. And the next slide shows that same man 40 years on, reflecting on a book that I wrote with him on the front cover called Hunter-Gatherers Today, reflecting on how people used to have better access to food 40 years previously than they do today. And this is just some examples of how people live off the land in an Indigenous protected area on land that they own. They harvest foods, magpie goose, kangaroo, estuarine crocodile, feral water buffalo, and introduced species. And I put these pictures up just to give a sense of how close and personal people are in relation to game, how there's a way of life where people are intimately connected with animals that they kill for livelihood. People now use modern technology to shoot feral buffalo and drag it to camp. Kids get very close and personal to harvested game, and they get close and personal to game that they've now domesticated, and people are just very comfortable with animals. Now, this is a way of being that is anathema to the state project to make people on welfare dependent on capitalist food production. And in relation to food sovereignty, I was very taken by reading a book which I recommend to everybody here, Post-Colonialism, Indigeneity and Struggles for Food Sovereignty, edited by Marissa Wilson. I don't know if people are familiar with that book. There is a chapter in it by Charles Menzies that's very interesting on the salmon fisheries in British Columbia. But I guess the provocation I have, and I want to put to the group, is why is it that these notions of alternative food networks in subaltern spaces, why is it that food sovereignty is so marginalised in situations where the only thing that people are provided is land and resource rights, living in extraordinary remote conditions where there aren't jobs, where people are highly welfare dependent, and when they are welfare dependent, in the Australian context, they're forced to work for the dole under the Community Development Program, and many of them are not paid cash, but are given a card that ties them to stores where they have to buy Western foods produced by industrial capitalism. So there's a contradiction there that I try and highlight. And I try and highlight that in relation to a model that I've developed called the hybrid economy model. And I guess all I want to emphasise here is some of the interdependencies that exist between capitalist and non-capitalist ways of being. But why is it that that customary element is being eliminated in a way by the state project of improvement? And why is it that in the Australian context we're not seeing Indigenous pushback to the state eliminating people's opportunities to access foods that they're guaranteed under Western native title law? So I'll leave it there. Thank you. I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague Dean Yibarbuk, who will speak about his country in Western Arnhem Land.
Okay, thank you. Kama mamjari be wanda kun wak mana yolon mat pere gure mat har guri me gure mat pere kun bol kang Australia par ngai kun kanji duni gure northern Australia. Just letting you know, I came from a long way in Australia, in northern Australia, giving you information or sharing information from what we are doing with our people in land management and how we came about changing the whole concept of Indigenous land management within our country. So my thesis is going to be a transfer of knowledge and language in the IPA, Wardekken IPA regions. Indigenous protected area, as you may see, is in the northern part of this Australia. We are situated where I work. It's right on the, almost in the middle of Western Arnhem Land. Now, Arnhem Land is the Indigenous owned land that doesn't need a land right, that doesn't need a land claim. This is fully owned Indigenous land. This is where I operate, this is where I live, this is my country. Now, in histories, our history is based on the collective information by archaeologists, anthropologists, that is back, that we came from last 65,000 years and continue. This is based on what has been recorded by archaeologists, anthropologists, but by our terminology thinking, we go far beyond that and managed and lived that country in harmony just after the colonization appeared in our country. Colonization, when it started to appear in our country, there was massive shift back movements of people, messages coming across to our land and telling us there's something that we never experienced before. There's a new kind of people are visiting in our territory. And that brought a lot of the introduced feral animals, feral weeds in our land, what is now, it's very, very devastated. And apart when they're seeing these things as coming into the shoreline in Arnhem Land, people have recorded it by, doing painting on the rock arts. Our information goes into the rock arts, not in, as it became an university type of a rock art for our young generations. So we can tell the histories of what happened, what has been seen. What has been seen, what has been painted, as you may see, that's horses, and down below where the image of mermaid women, there's a gun, and also ships that has been spotted. So people ran back up in the escarpment and started painting what they saw and what is coming into the land. Now, during the time when the colonization has been happening, a lot of our people moved out of our land where we lived once upon a time. We lived and hunted and gathered what has been there. But then again, people have moved out to the urban type of community, settlement or set up by the government or missionaries type of settlement. So we left the country, became an empty. The land became without a people. And the land was still waiting for people to return and remain and manage it back again. When we left the country, the fire took place, wildfire took place. And as you can see, within our IPA area, there's a massive fire that's been happening while people moved out of the country. It was a lot of burning, hot fires, and who could have been, was chasing off our little small mammals and animals, disappearing them. And there's also other things that's coming in as well. The feral animals was coming in, stamping our watersheds and damaging our sacred site and all that. When we went back to the home and started living on the land, we could see the indicators, such as cypress, clytris, how that fire has been going over the period of years and burning of really hot and wildfires. Then elders started to come together and bringing back the people. They wanted to see people going back on the land and start remaining and managing and looking after our spiritual and cultural land. And they had a lot of, they were very sad when they saw the country was unmanaged, and there was a lot when they left, the fire took over. So a lot of the seniors got together and started to talk and bringing young people in to ask them if they were interested in coming back home and learn the language, learn the culture, start teaching other young children as well. Because this is the last opportunity we took, because we knew a lot of our elders was passing on, and the new generation, as myself and other colleagues and friends that I had, we started to get ourselves together and got in touch with our elders and started to share their visions and what they wanted to see in the future. This is when we were going back at home and we set up this land management program. First thing that we got involved is trying to stop the fires, which is we did stopping fires, and wildfire was occurring in that country for a decade ago. And we were working closely with our scientists, doing a lot of monitoring. We've gone back to the traditional practices, like doing our burning, plus we're getting our elders jumping on a plane and going on the chopper, and also looking out the area where they wanted to burn, in the traditional areas where they wanted to burn. Each clan group, each elders have an opportunity jumping on a chopper and going, identifying the areas of their own land, so that, so the young rangers would jump on and go and do the burning, in particular, the clan group estates. And we have a lot of consultation with traditional owners, with the young people, young rangers, old people and young people together, and trying to work out what burning will be taking place very early season. When we went back, started managing our land through fire management. First, when we first saw it in a map, or shown to us by our friends, our scientists, bushfires, NT, there was a massive red coverage on our land. That's how the fire was been happening for over the decade ago. And when we went back and started managing our country and managing fire work, this is what happened. There was no fire scars in our map. And we proved it, and we was happy, and we told this to our elders, that this is, now we are in control of our fire. The fire wasn't controlling us. Now it's all gone. This is because we're coming back home. We're living at home, and we're managing this country now. So elders were really, really happy to see the map, because it showed them how devastating fires has been happening from the period when they left. And now they're seeing that now the map is quite clear. There's no fire scars in there. So they continue sharing this information to many other communities as well. And that's how this land management ranger program became a very, very, top to our understanding and putting ourselves back. Because in the country, we are the managers of the country. We are conservationists in our country. We know the land. That's how that we can prove it to the Western science. But we combine those two toolbox together, Western kind of knowledge plus the traditional knowledges come together, working side by side. This is where I live. For 20 years, we lived on our land, set up by our own company, Wardekken company. It's a safari type of building. It's not a building like in the growth areas they have, but we appreciate this type of housing. It's just a tub and deckings. We use our own materials. We got our own builders, our indigenous builders. We set up this, our rangers do all the works and set up the infrastructures and stuff like that. Our governance, our Wardekken governance. In our governance, we have 4 ward systems. North, Gakpi, East, Goyak, South, Walem, Gadigat, West. So there's 4 ward systems within this IPA area we look after and manage. And there's quite a number of board members, all indigenous people who sit and make those decisions, decision makers for our company. Current for country, since we started with the fire projects, fire became our money. We sell a credit to the companies. They buy off, and that's how we make our money. Sustainable use of fire management, sustainable use of getting the money back, and we're putting our money back onto our employment for our company in the future. There's a room for our indigenous women as well, a space for ladies' employment as well. We see not not only seeing the men always doing our work, but also our women does our work as well. They carry out doing a monitoring, recovering species that we were thinking that the animals, small mammals and animals are disappearing. Now we've got our own scientists, own ecology, giving us, working with us, giving us understanding where these animals are, and we're trying to find them as well. we're seeing education, another area where we're seeing land management, ecological knowledge, conservation management. We're seeing the education is also part of it. We initiated the academy, the Wardekken Academy School for our children, because a number of our rangers have families, and we wanted our children coming to live to where we are at Wardekken, so they can learn what we are doing, how to manage. This is an external management we're taking, because children also, that opportunities is seeing their parents working in that environment. They can see and value what they will get out of it, or of the education to the mainstream when they grow up and seeing, okay, this is our opportunity, our elders are gone, now will start to take place. Thank you very much.